Welcome to the MHP Exchange, where the riches are in the niches. We'll show you how to invest your way into mobile home parks with real strategies, tips, and behind-the-scenes know-how to grow your cash flow. Stick around. This is where smart investing begins.
We sold a park to a sponsor who was in rapid growth mode. And 6 weeks later, the electric bill had gone unpaid, and residents had been without water for 2 weeks. Our old residents were calling us because services had went down, and they were in a panic. Why? Because the new owners had completely abandoned operations, focusing so much on growth that they forgot to have their operational instincts intact. That is the dark side of rapid growth in the manufactured housing industry. And it's time someone said it out loud. And we're going to talk about that on this episode of the MHP Exchange podcast. There's an illusion out there of rapid growth. And you see it. They're the influencers who are talking about how they're scaling aggressively. Look at their lifestyle. They're on private jets. They have large AUMs, and they're acquiring every quarter, raising big capital with flashy branding and talking about how great their lives are. But having that rapid growth without the operational systems in place creates cracks in their system, because without a field team, there's no accountability. And without accountability, your investment could be at significant risk. You know, acquiring properties, finding deals is not easy, but acquiring properties is not hard. Operating them well, that is where the real value is created. So I'm not here saying today that growth is bad, but growth without the proper infrastructure is reckless. And as an LP or as an investor, writing that check to a sponsor who does not have those systems in place, no matter how well that deal might look on paper, is a risk you don't want to take. Now, I say that because we're all, as a sponsor, you're out there, you're looking for new opportunities. You're obviously looking to network and meet people who might want to participate in your growth. But you have to go beyond the flashy website or the fast-talking founders or the pitch decks that have these hockey sticks growth assumptions. And what you should be asking is, who is responsible for the operations on a day-to-day basis? What's that resident turnover like? How do you handle maintenance issues or items that occur on the ground? And I know that the thesis of when the residents own their homes and you just own their land, it is a very passive investment and it is very hands-off. But the reality is that you have to create touch points for those residents to stay in tune to what's happening on the ground, to make sure that your culture is being maintained and the community is being elevated. Because without those ingredients, it's a recipe for disaster. And if the answer is, I'm going to hire some VAs, that's probably not where you want to back. I'm going to give you a real world situation that we've experienced, and the red flags were there in the sale process. And typically from us, when we know we're acquiring a property, our ops team will be in touch with the operators or the operators managers on a regular basis as we're getting ready to onboard. I mean, we just kicked back a deal in diligence because there were some things that were discovered. But by the time we had really moved on, we had already had 5 substantial contacts with the owner and the owner's representatives on the ground, not including their broker, right? Specifically about transition, what needs to be done, who's going to be there, going over residents, issues that might have happened, things that they've resolved, and things that we might have to do going forward. This didn't happen in this scenario. we sold a quasi-stabilized asset. There was still some value add there. It was a market we were looking at exiting. This was a market they were looking to grow in. It looked like it was a match made in heaven. And initially, we had residents contacting us within the first few weeks of not knowing who to pay. Services have been cut. Grass has been, longer than ever. No one knows what's going on. Not knowing who the new manager was. Water being shut off because the electric bill wasn't paid and everything was on private water systems. And so for 2 weeks they were without water. So this was clearly a sponsor who was growing, but not operationally ready. They delegated everything. They built no systems. So who suffers? Residents suffer, obviously, from the first go. I mean, imagine if you're on the ground living in a community and all of a sudden you're going 2 weeks without water, not because of a national emergency, not because of a weather impacted issue. You're going without water because the owner of your property didn't put the electric in their name. That's something that shouldn't happen and gives the rest of us in this industry a black eye. And I get it. If you're running a business, you're not the guy down there on the ground. I mean, at one point, Eric and I were. When we built our business, we were two boots on the ground, handling the day-to-day, whether it was showing homes, whether it was getting units ready to be leased up, meeting with contractors and vendors, ensuring that the operations on the ground were running effectively and efficiently to deliver the resident service, and our investors securing their investment and making sure their returns, we were able to hit their expectations. So I get at some point you have to delegate some of that responsibility, that operational responsibility, to other people. But that doesn't mean you abdicate the responsibility or the framework of checking in, of reporting, and of expectation of your team on the ground. You can't just blindly hand it off to somebody or to some outsourced VA and expect to get that same type of results. There needs to be systems in place. And if your sponsor is only looking or only focused on new deals and raising capital, that might be a red flag for you to take a look at, because the result of that is chaos, deferred maintenance, legal risk, and eventually LP destruction. So what should you look for? What does a real operator look like? Well, they should have an operational system in place, an org chart, an organization that can handle the different touch points that are needed, even in stabilized communities, to make sure resident communication is seamless back and forth, and they have an understanding of what happens and what is going on down on the ground. I'll give you, when we first started at acquisition, and we still make it a habit, every time we close on a property, we'll always have boots on the ground, and we'd like to go meet with the residents prior to and just after to let them know that there's new ownership, new expectations, and what they can expect from us and what we expect from them, right? And what is the plan for the next 3, 6, 9 months, so they could get a clarity in terms of what's happening. I mean, you have to remember, these are communities. You could look at them as trailer parks or mobile home parks. At the end of the day, as you're transforming them into a community, and the community means that people are embedded there. They have a vested interest in that land, just the way that you do as an investor. So we want to make them part of that process. And we used to ensure that they would get a welcome package day one, which would go over with new community rules and a little cover letter from us to say who we are and some of the other communities we might own and operate in that market or elsewhere. That's changed slightly. I mean, with the advent of, or being able to use some of the technologies that are out there, now we'll have a QR code, which allows us to track who actually is opening, who has it, who we need to touch. So with the QR code, they're able to get their community rules, they're able to log into their portal, and we're able to see exactly, kind of what they're seeing. But we make sure that our field team has accountability. They're reporting back up the chain on a weekly basis, and we're seeing, what projects that they're working on. What's their community headline for the week? What's the response been from our residents? And then we have the data and the numbers that we're tracking to make sure that they're executing on the business plan as we've laid out. And it's having that communication, that's touch points back and forth, that allow you to be a good operator. Because at the end of the day, without our residents getting that experience and wanting to stay there, the investment suffers. And we look at it as being responsible stewardship. We are stewards of that land. We want to leave it in a better place than we found it. And we want to make those communities better for the people that are residing there. And if we have a better community, that should, if we've executed on everything else, that should result in a better investment for our partners. At the end of the day, guys, this business is unlike other businesses. Our business serves real people, families who rely on us for shelter. And your capital out there should flow to sponsors who treat those operations with that type of responsibility. So ask yourself this question. Look for operators who've proven they can operate with excellence. And I will tell you, as we have people who've participated with us and has asked us about other sponsors, and us knowing who that sponsor was, we might not have known exactly what the deal was in particular, but we knew the jockey, and we were happy to recommend that jockey, knowing that at the end of the day, they were going to be a good steward of the land and they were going to be able to execute. So this isn't about one being, we're just the best, but we can tell who's a good operator, who's a good sponsor, right? And who's a good operator and who's just focused on rapid growth at the detriment of everything else. We've built the peak MHP operating system because where we focus on elevating the community, elevating the standards of the community and of the culture that's in that community to force appreciation inside of that, and then create key outcomes such as additional income streams or liquidity events to recapitalization or refinance. Make sure that whoever you're looking at or whatever investment you're looking at, that they have an operating system and operating mechanism in place to ensure that not only is your investment safe, but to ensure that they're going to be good stewards of that land and make sure that that resident experience isn't going to be impacted negatively. So if you have questions about this episode, if you have questions about what it takes to be a good operator or our peak MHP operating system, send us a message down. You could click the link below. We'd be happy to have a conversation with you about your next mobile home park investment. Until next time, everyone, happy investing.